the heart of West Africa, a new dawn is rising. The ground shakes not from war, but from preparation. Burkina Faso, once underestimated, is now building the largest military training base in West Africa, a bold declaration that Africa is ready to defend itself by itself. And at the center of it all stands one man, Ibrahim Traoré. Under his leadership, the small but resilient nation of Burkina Faso has become the symbol of African strength and defiance. The decision to build this massive base wasn't born overnight. It came from years of foreign interference, broken promises, and betrayal. The West called it help. Traoré called it control. Now the president who once wore the uniform of a soldier is commanding something far greater, an army built not to serve outsiders but to protect Africans. And this base is not just a camp. It's a statement, a fortress of sovereignty. The project, located near Ouahigouya, spans hundreds of hectares, equipped with state-of-the-art facilities, training grounds, command centers, drone labs, and even African-made armored vehicle production lines. For the first time, Burkinabe soldiers will train with African-made weapons, not imported tools of dependency. But make no mistake, this move has sent shockwaves through the western corridors of power. Washington, Paris, and Brussels are watching closely, terrified that this might set a precedent, that Africa could finally become militarily independent. Traoré, however, is unfazed. In one of his recent speeches, he declared, "If we can protect our land, our people, and our dignity, then we owe no one our obedience." Those words have echoed far beyond Burkina Faso. They've sparked a fire across the continent. From Mali to Niger, leaders are sending their troops and officers to train under this new system, a Pan-African doctrine built by Africans for Africans. The facility is being developed with strategic partnerships from countries like Russia and Turkey, offering military technology and training expertise, but on Burkinabe terms. And while Western media calls it dangerous militarization, the people call it freedom's foundation. The base's motto, simple yet powerful, our land, our strength, our unity. But behind the concrete and barbed wire, there's a much deeper story, a strategy that could reshape Africa's future forever. Because this is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about an entire continent reclaiming its power, one soldier at a time. Traoré's grand vision is that this base will become the African Defense Academy, a place where future generations of African officers will learn to protect not just borders, but sovereignty itself. And as construction progresses rapidly, the whispers grow louder. Is this the first step toward an African military alliance that could rival NATO one day? The world is about to find out. As the foundation of the new military base took shape under the scorching West African sun, international attention intensified. Satellite images began to circulate across intelligence networks, revealing rows of armored vehicles, runways under construction, and barracks capable of housing thousands of soldiers. The Western press tried to frame it as a Russian expansion effort, but in reality, it was an African rebirth in motion. Ibrahim Traoré was not interested in Western approval. His eyes were fixed on a bigger dream, an Africa that can protect itself. He had witnessed his nation's humiliation for years, soldiers trained abroad, fighting with outdated weapons, and relying on outside powers for defense. That era, he declared, was over. In a powerful televised address, he said, "For too long, our young soldiers have gone to foreign lands to learn how to fight. Yet every time we return only to defend others' interests, not our own. This base will change that forever. Here, we will train not mercenaries but guardians of Africa." Crowds erupted in cheers across Ouagadougou. His words were like thunder across the Sahel, echoing in Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even beyond Africa's shores. Young Africans began posting messages online with the hashtag #AfricanDefenseRise, a digital movement supporting Traoré's bold stand. But as the excitement grew, so did the opposition. Western diplomats began issuing thinly veiled warnings. A French spokesperson called the development a concerning militarization that risks destabilizing the region. In Washington, Security briefings described Traoré as a rising populist threat who was aligning Africa with adversarial powers. Behind closed doors, American and European officials discussed sanctions, aid suspensions, and propaganda tactics. They wanted to isolate Burkina Faso to make Traoré bend. But this time, he didn't flinch. Instead, he doubled down. Reports confirmed that Burkina Faso had signed a confidential defense cooperation agreement with Russia, including military technology sharing, counter-terror training, and the transfer of drone systems. At the same time, engineers from Turkey arrived quietly, bringing expertise in modern command and control systems and infrastructure planning. The base was transforming fast. In just months, what was once barren land had turned into a fortress. The first phase included a military academy capable of training over 5,000 soldiers per year, equipped with simulation centers, language labs, and advanced survival training zones. Traoré wanted every Burkinabe soldier to understand not only combat, but strategy, intelligence, and African history. As he told his officers, "If we do not know where we come from, we cannot know what we are defending." Western analysts were baffled by how quickly the project advanced, especially given that Burkina Faso's economy had been under pressure. But what they didn't see was the massive wave of volunteerism. Thousands of citizens, engineers, and students offered their labor for free. Local companies donated materials. It wasn't a state project anymore. It was a people's mission. Even more shocking to Western observers was Traoré's decision to ban foreign contractors from key roles in the construction. Instead, he announced that all management, design, and oversight would be done by Burkinabe engineers and the country's new Defense Innovation Unit, a bold move to ensure the project remained free from espionage or sabotage. One insider from the Burkinabe Defense Ministry revealed, "The president told us that we will not just build walls, we will build pride. Every brick here must remind us that we stood on our own feet." Meanwhile, the African continent watched closely. From Nairobi to Accra, defense experts began to study Burkina Faso's blueprint, the idea that independence starts with self-defense. Even countries that had long been under Western military influence started to rethink their strategies. But this wasn't only about defense, it was about reclaiming respect. In another fiery public address, Traoré stated, "If they say we are militarizing, let them remember who brought weapons to our lands. If they call us dangerous, let them remember who built their wealth from our soil. We will no longer apologize for standing tall." Every sentence carried the weight of history and the hope of a continent that had been silent for too long. Yet deep within Western capitals, intelligence agencies were beginning to worry that Traoré's message was spreading too fast. Their reports warned that Burkina Faso's new model of sovereignty could trigger a domino effect, empowering more African nations to reject foreign control. Behind the scenes, several African leaders quietly reached out to Traoré, expressing their desire to join training exchanges and send officers to the new base once operational. For the first time, the idea of a Pan-African defense network didn't seem impossible. And as night fell over the Sahel, under the hum of construction machines and the chants of patriotic songs, Traoré stood overlooking the horizon, the glow of the half-built base reflecting in his eyes. He turned to his closest advisor and said softly, "We are no longer building a base, we are building Africa's shield." The advisor nodded, realizing that this was just the beginning, and that the world was about to witness the rise of a new kind of power. The sun blazed over the plains of Burkina Faso as the first group of soldiers marched across the vast expanse of the new military base. The dust beneath their boots rose like smoke, carrying with it the sound of a new era. This was no ordinary army. These were the first graduates of Africa's largest homegrown defense training program, forged entirely on African soil, under African command. Each unit carried not just rifles but purpose. Their uniforms bore a new insignia, a golden stallion surrounded by a black circle representing strength, unity, and sovereignty. These were not the soldiers of a regime, but of a revolution in spirit. When Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the base for the inauguration, thousands of citizens and international observers gathered to witness history. With his signature beret and calm yet defiant expression, he stood on the grandstand as the anthem of Burkina Faso played. The air was electric with pride. He raised his hand and began. Brothers and sisters, today, the Burkinabe soldier kneels to no one. We are not the tools of foreign empires. We are the guardians of our children's future. This land, this soil, will never again be protected by those who exploit it. The crowd roared. Soldiers saluted. In that moment, Traoré's words were not merely political, they were spiritual. Every syllable carried the memory of generations who had fought against oppression, from the colonization of Africa to the modern wars for resources. Soon, video clips of the event spread online. Across Africa, millions shared his speech, calling it the new Declaration of Independence. But the celebration did not sit well in foreign capitals. In Paris, analysts claimed the base was a threat to regional stability. In Washington, a classified report described Traoré as a charismatic nationalist advancing anti-Western sentiment through militarization. The document ended with a chilling line. If left unchecked, this model will replicate across sub-Saharan Africa within 5 years. And it was already happening. Mali announced a plan to build its own joint defense academy. Niger expressed interest in sending cadets for training. Guinea hinted at similar ambitions. The idea of a unified African defense strategy was no longer fiction. It was unfolding in real time. Western media tried to twist the story, painting Traoré as a dictator in disguise and the base as a foreign-backed outpost. But on the ground, people saw something different. They saw their sons and daughters in uniform, standing tall under the Burkinabe flag, trained to protect, not to obey. Inside the base, the curriculum was revolutionary. Soldiers were not only trained in combat tactics but in engineering, communication systems, cyber defense, and African political history. Each cadet was taught that the gun was not their identity. The mind was their greatest weapon. One of the instructors, a veteran from Mali, described it best. "We are training African lions, not guard dogs. They will not bark when commanded. They will roar when provoked." The spirit of unity extended beyond the battlefield. Within the base's walls, there were laboratories where young engineers worked on designing drones built from African components, using materials sourced from within the continent. Another section focused on renewable energy, ensuring the base ran almost entirely on solar power, a symbolic rejection of the fossil fuel chains that had long tied Africa to foreign economies. But as progress soared, so did sabotage. Within weeks, Burkina Faso's cybersecurity unit detected several infiltration attempts into their military servers. Unknown sources, later traced to Western networks, were attempting to steal defense blueprints and disrupt communication systems. Traoré was furious. He convened an emergency meeting with his top advisors and military chiefs. "They fear what they cannot control," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "If they cannot buy us, they will try to break us, but let them try. Every attack only makes us stronger." In response, he ordered the immediate creation of Burkina Faso's first cyber command center, manned by young African programmers trained in digital warfare. The move stunned the intelligence community. No one expected a landlocked African country, once written off as poor and unstable, to leap so quickly into technological defense. Then came the next shockwave. Leaked documents revealed that foreign mercenaries had been deployed in neighboring regions, allegedly under humanitarian missions. Traoré called them out publicly during a fiery speech. "Do not hide your spies under the mask of aid. We see your soldiers disguised as saviors. Africa is awake, and we no longer fall for your illusions." The declaration sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Western ambassadors demanded clarification. But Traoré refused to explain himself. Instead, he doubled his focus on cooperation with African allies. Within months, Joint drills between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger began taking place, marking the birth of what analysts started calling the Sahel Defense Alliance. It was Africa's boldest step toward independence since the end of colonialism. Meanwhile, on the ground, the military base continued expanding. What had started as a national training center was now being transformed into a Pan-African military academy. A massive hall was built to honor heroes of African resistance, from Thomas Sankara to Patrice Lumumba. Every cadet, before graduation, had to visit that hall and take an oath beneath the inscription carved into the wall. "You are not trained to serve. You are trained to defend." The oath ceremony became symbolic across the continent. Even students from civilian universities began to replicate it during their graduation days, as a vow to remain loyal to Africa's liberation, not to any flag or foreign sponsor. But despite all these achievements, one question lingered in the air. Would the world allow Burkina Faso to succeed? Because in every era, whenever Africa tried to rise, someone tried to push it down. Still, Traoré seemed unfazed. In an exclusive interview broadcast across Africa, he looked straight into the camera and said, "They have tanks, they have satellites, they have billions, but they do not have what we have: belief. You cannot kill belief." And with that, the image of a defiant young leader standing in front of Africa's largest training base became a symbol not just of Burkina Faso's strength, but of the continent's awakening. The echoes of drums from the inauguration ceremony continued through the night, carried by the wind across the savannah. The soldiers stood guard under a sky full of stars, knowing that what they were protecting was bigger than borders. It was the dream of a free Africa. Night fell heavy over Burkina Faso's vast new military base, but it wasn't silence that ruled the dark. It was the hum of drones patrolling the skies, the glow of computer screens inside command centers, and the echo of soldiers running drills deep into midnight. This was not just a base anymore. It had become the heart of a movement, a living symbol of a continent no longer willing to kneel. But far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, in the gleaming corridors of power in Washington, London, and Paris, the mood was tense. Reports flooded in. Burkina Faso's new base has become a regional training hub. African nations are lining up to join Traoré's defense alliance. Russian, Chinese, and even Latin American observers are planning visits. Western intelligence agencies called it the African pivot. For the first time in decades, a country once dismissed as weak and impoverished was leading a full-scale transformation, not with loans or dependence, but with discipline, unity, and self-reliance. And that terrified the West. Within days, mysterious things began to happen. Satellite interference disrupted drone communications. Propaganda videos appeared online accusing Burkina Faso's army of human rights violations. Fake reports circulated about internal divisions within the government. Western media headlines suddenly turned cold. Is Traoré's army becoming a threat? Burkina Faso's militarization raises regional concerns. It was a coordinated strike, not with bombs but with information and deception. Traoré, however, had anticipated it. Sitting in his strategy room, surrounded by his commanders and cybersecurity officers, he looked over the reports with calm precision. He said quietly, "They want to make the world fear us, but fear is their oldest weapon and we will not use their language." Instead of responding with anger, Traoré took a different route. The next morning he appeared live on national television. No flags behind him, no soldiers around him, just a plain wooden desk and his steady voice. He said, "We are not building this base to attack. We are building it so that no one dares to attack us again. Burkina Faso does not seek war, but it will not run from one either. To the world we say this: stop looking at Africa as your field of influence. Start seeing it as your equal." Those words hit like a thunderclap. Across Africa, from the crowded markets of Lagos to the deserts of Chad, people stopped to listen. In Senegal, a group of students held banners saying, "Africa is not for sale." In Kenya, online forums erupted with praise. This man speaks what every African leader should have said decades ago. Even in South Africa, Politicians quietly referenced Traoré's speech as a moment of continental reawakening. Meanwhile, inside the base, a new phase had begun: joint exercises with Mali and Niger. Hundreds of troops moved in formation, simulating cross-border operations. Commanders communicated in code through encrypted channels built by African engineers. This wasn't just training anymore, this was integration. Foreign observers were stunned. In less than a year, Traoré had transformed Burkina Faso from a vulnerable nation into a regional military and ideological powerhouse. And then came the final spark. A leaked diplomatic cable revealed that Western forces had been considering limited intervention options in the Sahel under the guise of humanitarian stabilization. The news ignited fury across the continent. People saw it for what it was: a modern rebranding of old colonial control. Traoré's response was swift and surgical. He called an emergency summit in Ouagadougou with leaders from Mali, Niger, and Guinea. The session was private, but sources inside said his speech shook the room. He said, "They still think they can use aid to enter through our doors, but this time our doors are guarded. If they come as friends, we welcome them, but if they come as masters, they will meet resistance." The summit ended with a historic declaration: the Sahel Defense Charter, a unified framework for African nations to coordinate defense, intelligence, and resource protection, free from any Western oversight. When news broke, the world gasped. One American journalist wrote, "This is the day Africa drew its line in the sand." From that day on, Western diplomats began rethinking their strategies. Sanctions were discussed, aid programs were suspended, and threats of isolation were whispered. But Africa didn't flinch. Instead, a new image emerged, that of young African soldiers standing side by side, flags of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger flying together over the desert wind. And deep inside the massive training base, a new plaque was installed on the main gate. It read, "This soil is not for sale. This freedom is not negotiable." It became the symbol of the new era. Weeks later, Traoré walked alone at dusk through the base he had built from nothing. He watched the young cadets training under the sunset, their chants echoing through the air. There was pride in his eyes, not arrogance, but peace. He turned to his aide and said softly, "They called us poor because we didn't have gold, but our wealth was always here in our people. And now the world will finally see it." The aide nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, it wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It was about every African nation that had ever been told it couldn't stand on its own. The lights of the base shone across the horizon, visible for miles, a beacon of what was coming next. Because the truth was clear now. Burkina Faso hadn't just built the largest military training base in West Africa. It had built the foundation for a new Africa. The kind that no longer waits for permission. The kind that doesn't bow to threats. The kind that stands tall, unbroken, unbought, and unafraid. And as the African night settled in, the wind carried one phrase over the barracks, whispered by the soldiers and citizens alike: "For Africa, for freedom." And with that, the story of Burkina Faso's awakening became the spark that would ignite the continent. If you believe Africa deserves its strength, its unity, and its voice, subscribe, share, and stand with this message. Because the world needs to hear that the new Africa has already begun.